Block Party DFS show with Jmtowin from 1 week season. You guys know the drill at this point. We are going to walk through this week 11 DFS slate via the lens of DraftKings. We're going to do a slate overview. Then we'll get JM's favorite plays at each position. And then we'll wrap up by building a lineup on DraftKings, give you guys some ideas as you head into the weekend and try to all find ourselves at the top of the leaderboards. I'm Pete Overzet. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, Curry spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
Hey everyone, indeed, JM back in the saddle. How we feeling this week?
I'm good, man. I feel like this is amateur hour. I just closed the tab where I was we had the video. I was trying to find it. Told you my computer froze like right before we came on air. You asked me what today's block was, and I was like, let me find that once we get going. But yeah, I feel good, ready to go now.
Yes, we will dive into it. We will figure this out on the fly real quick as usual. Week 10, can barely remember what won last week at this point. I think it was another big Jalen Hurts week. How did your week 10 go?
You know, it was funny. My point of failure last week was Saquon Barkley, speaking of Jalen Hurts. So after we see him put up another 146-yard, 2-touchdown game last night, I was 100% Saquon Barkley. I had in the Winner Circle pod this last week, I did a roster review of some of my rosters, just talking through the build process and all that. But one of the rosters I looked at, it was literally like would have won the tournament if Justin Jefferson and Saquon Barkley had combined for 50 points, right? And so it was just one of those weird weeks where the non-obvious things came together, and then the obvious things were kind of my points of failure. So not a bad week, but not a great week. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of, those are the breaks of DFS, right? We position ourselves the way we can position ourselves. And I think the more we think through that probabilistic lens, the more we can kind of ride the highs and lows. It's one of the things I talked about on Winner Circle was like, once it became pretty clear partway through the late games that I wasn't winning anything, like I turned the page and there was no like emotional roller coaster for me. Cause it was like, man, that was a great week of play. And it just didn't come together, right? There's going to be weeks like that. Yeah. There's going to be weeks where you don't play your best and maybe you win a tournament or do really well. But yeah, the best we can do is put ourselves in good position and see what happens from there.
Yeah, one of my best teams. I thought I was going to have an insanely good day on DraftKings because I rolled out a Russell Wilson to George Pickens. That was part of the block that we did. And then, one thing that we didn't have available to us when we did that show on Friday was knowing that Brian Robinson was going to be out. And so I included Eckler in there. So I'm watching George Pickens score. I'm watching Eckler get 2 touchdowns. I had Jonathan Taylor on that lineup. I'm like, holy cow, this lineup is going to crush. And then everything just petered out after that. But shout out to your block. I know at the time it was, again, people kind of giving it the side eye there. But Najee didn't quite get there. But that Russ to Pickens stuff sure looked nice on a low scoring week.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nature of things right now. I mean, it's like 150, 155, 160 was winning tournaments this last week. So it's the nature of things where if you can get something that hits, I mean, that's kind of good enough for the most part. So yeah, this is kind of another similar week where we don't expect a really high scoring slate. So similarly, if we can get some stuff that hits, puts us in good position. I will say, so kind of similar to last week, but I opened up ownership projections for the first time this morning and kind of made some audible noises of like, oh man, because some of the guys I like are right up there near the top, and yet I don't have that much confidence in those guys compared to some others. I have more confidence than last week, but it's another week we're going off the board a little bit, might benefit us. And so yeah, we'll talk about kind of some of the sharper plays on the slate, but hopefully also touch on some of the plays that we can go to kind of thinking outside the box, because that might be what's required to win a tournament this week.
Yeah, let's go ahead and look at this slate from kind of a high level overview perspective. We got 11 games here, a couple teams with massive team totals. Obviously the Lions here, 30.5, big home faves against the Jags. We have some tighter spreads that could lead to some interesting games here. Of course, we got Chiefs, Bills. Niners have a big team total at 27.25. What kind of stands out to you when you overview these games?
Yeah, for me, what stands out to me is there's not like a spot that really jumps off the page to me. There's not a game environment. Right? We had a good example was the Browns game against the Ravens or the Bengals and Ravens game, where you're looking at a game environment that has a high probability of turning into the sort of game that you had to have in order to win that week. I don't see a game like that this week. And so I see a lot of one-sided stacks on my end. Obviously, the Steelers is one of these ones that stands out because they're playing that Ravens team that forces teams to the air. But then you also have the question mark with the Steelers of, you got Arthur Smith, that they're going to be kind of hard-headed with their run game. And also, I think it's critical to keep in mind that Russell Wilson's actually best with a run game. You don't necessarily want Russ having to make a bunch of short area throws to march the field. What you really want is him to be on a team that's able to march the field that way, and then he hits some deep shots and mixes in some short and intermediate throws. So, there are like more points of failure on that one than maybe it might look like on the surface. And I don't necessarily see the game environment that's going to draw me toward it. And I think the field is kind of expressing the same sentiment because we're seeing, exposure. The field is showing ownership inclinations toward Bo Nix, toward Drake Maye, toward some of these guys who maybe aren't in the highest total spots, but it's like, well, this is kind of what the slate providing us. And I don't know that that's necessarily wrong this week.
Let me ask you kind of about two big shifts in what it maybe means for a team or an offense. Obviously the Colts, we have Anthony Richardson taking back over, pretty big, stylistic change from what we've gotten from Joe Flacco and what that means. And then also the Bears firing Shane Waldron, promoting a different OC here to call plays. What do you think about these shifts? Is that changing how you're viewing these teams? Granted, neither of them have, good implied team totals this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Colts, we have to think about where pricing is set, right? And this is one of the things I loved was back in like the late 2010s when it was DraftKings played around with dynamic pricing. And so if you had a tougher matchup, then the price on a player would go down a little bit. If you had a softer matchup, the price would go up a little bit because it created a little bit more tension in our mind as far as like, how do we want to value these players? With pricing being static and not adjusted for matchup, you have situations where it's like, okay, like, yeah, these guys are fundamentally overpriced for this matchup, for this game environment. Take the Ravens, for example, like their prices are set based on their outcomes in their average game. And this is not their average game or their average matchup. Not to say that they can't hit, but they're overpriced. So similarly with the Colts, you have these guys priced for Joe Flacco being back there, Joe Flacco potentially throwing the ball 35 to 40 times, Joe Flacco throwing the ball with a little bit more accuracy than Anthony Richardson's going to have. So it's hard for me to see really jumping on that spot. And then with the Bears, one of the issues with the Bears offense is structural, which it's hard to change that too quickly. And so there's a component of like bad coaching with the offensive line. There's a component of bad play design where you can think of it like in a Shanahan system or a McVay system. The first, second, and third read, the quarterback's eyes are going to follow those in like a natural pattern. Whereas in the Shane Waldron system, it's like the first read might be over here, and then they've got to look over to the other side of the field for the second read, and like downfield for the third read. There's no natural progression to it. I don't know how much that can change this quickly. And so, for me, it's kind of nothing changes for me in the way I'm looking at the Bears as like this offense with potential, but by far the highest likelihood setup is that they don't reach that potential. And then with the Colts, it's like, hey, maybe you play Anthony Richardson, throw a dart at him and hope that you hit the big game because those can happen. A little time on the sidelines can help. Obviously, we saw that with Bryce Young, who's come back looking better. We saw that Josh Allen's rookie year. We've seen that with other quarterbacks. They take a little time on the sideline early on in their career, come back looking better. So I think Anthony Richardson's interesting in large field play. Not a guy I'm going toward on tighter builds, though.
Why don't we head over and talk about quarterback? Obviously, how we feel about a lot of these teams starts with the quarterback position. I think we should start up at the high end. No Jalen Hurts this week. So kind of our two pricey guys up here are Lamar Jackson at $8K, Josh Allen at $7,800. Neither of them in particularly juicy matchups. Are either of these guys going to be on the JM DFS menu this week?
Yeah, I think that Lamar is one of these guys that when we're looking at a slate where the field is expressing confidence in Bo Nix, in Drake Maye, and Russell Wilson, it's the kind of spot where you could say, couldn't Lamar hit for a big game? I like to think about where we're going to see ascending ownership in ascending buy-ins. So I mentioned last week that Christian McCaffrey, he was projected at like 10% ownership. And I said, I expect him to get closer to 15 to 20%. And I expect him to be higher owned the higher the buy-in level. So Lamar Jackson's a similar type of player that I would expect him to be higher owned the higher the buy-in level, because the sharper the player pool, the likelier you are to find people who say, man, like there's not a ton on this slate to really fall in love with couldn't Lamar put up 35 DraftKings points? And so that's kind of the bucket he falls into. There's nothing on paper that you're going to say, yeah, Lamar is a smash play this week, but couldn't he put up 30 to 35 DraftKings points? And couldn't nobody else on the slate put up 30 to 35? Low ownership on Zay Flowers, low projected ownership on Rashad Bateman. So there's certainly opportunity here for Lamar Jackson stack to be really interesting. It's not one of those that when I go through my research and carve out my player pool, it's like, hey, this stands out as one of the sharpest plays on the slate. But it's certainly one of these plays that could be what's required to win a tournament this week. And then with Josh Allen, it's a really interesting setup because the question with Josh Allen is, did they let him take over the game? Last year he scored, this is off the top of my head, but it was like 30 plus DraftKings points in 9 out of 17 games or something crazy like that. And this year it's been 2 games. And that's because Joe Brady's calling the offense and Joe Brady is kind of limiting Josh Allen's rushing attempts, limiting his rush attempts near the goal line. They're spreading the ball around to a bunch of different pass catchers. They got rid of Stephon Diggs. They don't have this alpha anymore. They're rotating running backs. And so what we've seen is an offense that's performing well, but not producing a lot of tournament winners. Khalil Shakir is the only pass catcher who's cracked 20 DraftKings points this year. And he did it once, right? Like right now, Khalil Shakir is projecting as the highest owned wide receiver on the slate against a really good Chiefs defense as a guy who's cracked 20 DraftKings points once on a team that's cracked 20 DraftKings points once. But with that said, I think Josh Allen's interesting. And I think for me, the question is, if he takes over the game, do you necessarily need a stacking partner with him? Does he take over the game in such a way that he's rushing for 65, 70 yards and scoring 1 or 2 touchdowns on the ground? So I'll tell you this, Pete, last week was probably the first time outside of maybe a couple Anthony Richardson rosters, last week is probably the first time in 3 or 4 years that I've played a quarterback naked. And the quarterbacks I played naked were Mac Jones and Justin Herbert. And there was a lot of theory behind that. Actually ended up being the sharpest way to build those rosters. But the theory was like, we might not get any quarterback scoring 30 points. So if you get 17 to 20 from these guys, they're probably not actually bringing a pass catcher with them. And then you're just opening things up on your roster. I could kind of follow that up this week with Josh Allen naked. And what I really like is Josh Allen brought back with Travis Kelce. I think that's an interesting pairing where you're saying Josh Allen has to take over the game. This is higher scoring. The Chiefs have to play through Travis Kelce. And maybe you don't see a Bills pass catcher come up with Josh Allen, but we get that 30-point score from him on a week where we might not get any other quarterbacks going for more than 25. So I'm not going to argue against stacking Josh Allen with somebody, but I think he's a really interesting, naked play. Speaking as a guy who almost never plays quarterbacks naked.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. And I spend a little bit more time in the underdog streets during the week leading up to this before pivoting my brain to salary cap. And I've been doing way more naked QB stuff there as well. And even looking at some of the, sim results for that stuff. And you'll see there's some pretty shocking results that you'll see of how much more optimal naked QB is. Even with QBs you normally wouldn't think, guys like Geno Smith or Jordan Love, that spread the ball around a good bit. So I think that's a good note and something to consider when you're building. You mentioned Brock Purdy, once again, going to be pretty popular. Hard to poke holes in this spot. Great team total at home. Everyone's healthy here, more or less. What is your thought on popular Brock Purdy this week?
Yeah, I mean, Purdy is one of these guys who he's kind of the benchmark. He's probably going to put up 18 to 26 DraftKings points kind of on a week in and week out basis. So no arguments against Purdy. It's kind of like, does he win you the tournament? That kind of depends on how the rest of the week shakes out. If nobody goes for 30 plus, and Purdy goes for his 23, 24 point score, he's the guy that you wanted to have. So I like Purdy this week. Again, similar setup where who do you stack him with? It's an open question. And we dive deep into that in the interpretations this week, and I'll hit on it in the player grid as well. But there's just a lot of numbers that stack up where it's not as sharp to stack Purdy with to guess on stacking Purdy with somebody right now as you might think on the surface. But Purdy in a vacuum, I think, is a sharp play.
Let's use that as an opportunity to mention we still got our 50% off promo code at OWS. So JM referencing some of the additional pieces of content on the site if you guys want to get his full scope of thoughts, as well as all of the contributors, overnight news, and JM's updated player pool on Sundays, all of that good stuff you can get with your OWS subscription. If you don't want to sign up for the whole year and you just want to do a weekly pass, you can just use the regular promo code Pete to get 20% off, or you can get that 50% off rest of season. So when you hear JM referencing some of those other content pieces on the site, that is how you get access. Promo code Pete50 will get you 50% off of those. Let's find some other quarterbacks that you might have interest in here. What about Jameis? Jameis looks like he's going to be fairly popular. He's cheap, pretty good matchup against the Saints. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the only fear. There's two fears. One fear is that Jameis just goes full Jameis. The other fear is it's a really soft matchup on the ground. And so you got Ken Dorsey calling the plays. He wants to let it rip. You've also got Kevin Stefanski as the head coach, the longtime offensive designer and play caller. And obviously, he's more inclined to have a run-based system where you're building everything off the run. So, I mean, with Jameis, he's going to throw the ball downfield. And then ideally he throws it 40 times. If he throws it 40 times, then the bad Jameis and the good Jameis kind of, weigh themselves or balance themselves out to where the mistakes that he makes also balance themselves off of the big plays that he's going to make. And you end up with the big game. If he throws the ball like 32 times, you have an opportunity for the mistakes to come and you not really to have those big plays fall into place. So Jameis comes with some risk, but he's definitely one of like the sharper quarterback plays on the slate. What's great about him too is, he's got cheap stacking partners. And so you can double stack Jameis. Because really when you're playing Jameis, you're saying he's throwing the ball a lot. You're betting on volume. And in PPR scoring, volume is king when you're talking about stacks, right? So we go from some of these quarterbacks where we're like, might not want to stack them at all, to Jameis where you're like, you probably want to double stack Jameis this week. And then that opens up a lot on your roster as well. So definitely like Jameis. And then you probably ask about this, but Drake Maye, another guy kind of in that same bucket where Drake Maye, you watch these games and it's like early on, the Patriots are kind of trying to coach him through like normal NFL quarterback play where it's like, all right, take what's there, take what the defense gives you and all that. And then as they get deeper into games, like maybe they fall behind or they're not being able to move the ball. And all of a sudden they're like, all right, just like do your Drake Maye thing. Right. And so he'll take off and run, but he'll also throw the ball downfield into tight coverage or into double coverage. And so he's kind of in this balance right now, similar to Jameis, where for a long time, in Pro Football Focus grading, Jameis would have like the highest big play rate of any quarterback in the NFL, but also the highest turnover-worthy play rate of any quarterback in the NFL. And Drake Maye is also in that same bucket right now where he's hitting these big plays, but then he's also having turnover-worthy plays. So that just shows us like he's willing to take risks. He's willing to throw the ball downfield. It's not quite Jameis because he doesn't have the same weapons, or it's not quite, rookie year Josh Allen because he doesn't have the same weapons, but it's in that bucket where we're going to get a 30-pointer from Drake Maye this season. And it could come this week, right? So Drake Maye is another guy who very much in the mix. He's going to be popular, which, I don't love. You don't love the volatile guy who's going to be popular. But at the same time, he doesn't know that he's going to be popular in DFS, right? Like that doesn't impact whether or not he scores his 30-pointer this week. So Drake Maye, Jameis kind of in the same bucket for me there.
So I'm taking it you prefer Maye to Bo Nix as far as rookie quarterbacks in a similar price range in home matchups here?
Yeah. So with Bo Nix, it's a situation. I don't mind Bo Nix, but he's not really in my core pool. It's kind of a situation of setup. And so where you have Drake Maye in a game where the Rams are probably going to score points, Drake Maye is probably going to have to throw the ball. Bo Nix, Broncos are favored. They're playing this Falcons team that forces short area throws. So Bo Nix has only topped 246 passing yards once. He's only topped like 223 twice, right? So what we're probably getting from him is a lot of short area throws. They're going to march the field. Falcons are, I think, 26th in opponent drive success rate, which means that they let teams march the field. They don't stop them on third downs. So we're going to see the Broncos march the field. What I like about Bo Nix is I think there's this perception around him that he's kind of a conservative quarterback and Sean Payton's calling a conservative offense, but that's not the case. Like Sean Payton's not calling the Saints Jameis Winston offense where he's like, let's try to coach him out of these mistakes. He's letting Bo Nix throw it downfield, but only in situations where the defense is allowing that. And so against a team like Atlanta that forces everything short, I think it's going to be a lot of dink and dunk, a lot of marching the field. And so maybe those points pile up to such an extent where you get that random like 26, 27 point game from him. But what you probably get, he's kind of in the old Keenan Allen bucket, right? Bo Nix, where you look through the game logs, you're like, all of these game logs are pretty good. Like he's not killing you in any of these. And that's what causes people to gravitate toward it. But that's like more median projection. That's more cash game. That's more what's safe as opposed to what's going to win you a tournament. We're probably not seeing a 30-pointer from him. And so because of that, I gravitate more toward the Jameis, more toward the Drake Maye, who brought a range of outcomes, but higher chance of winning you a tournament. But I don't have like a strong argument against Bo Nix. I think he's going to put up a solid score. He's got an outside shot at the big game, but he's just not where I'm going this week.
Let me ask you about a couple other spots that I think are interesting. The Lions have this massive team total. Most people are going to default to assuming, hey, they get it done on the ground. It's a David Montgomery game, a Jahmyr Gibbs game. I'll pause it. What if they get some of those touchdowns through the air? Any love for Jared Goff here?
No. Because even if they get the touchdowns through the air, it's like, I mean, we would have to buck so many trends, right? He's topped 25 pass attempts twice this year. He's topped 30 pass attempts once this year. Do we expect Mac Jones and the Jags to keep this game close? I don't. And so it's pretty clear. It's one, like, if we're talking Millie Maker, yeah, but it's one thing to say like, oh, crazy things can happen and let me bet on it. It's another thing where we can look through the lens of how coaches are calling a game and how this game is likely to play out, and then say, like, how likely is it to happen? So for me, I see Goff throwing it 25 or fewer times again. Maybe it's 27 pass attempts, something like that. But the problem is, like, he's got these 16 touchdown passes. He's throwing a lot of touchdown passes, but the price tags on pass catchers on this offense are so high that they need more than touchdown receptions. They need volume. Amon St. Brown needs the 9-10 catches, not the 4 catches for 65 yards and a touchdown, or even 2 touchdowns, right? And so, yeah, for me, Goff is not the place to go. And I think it's pretty, like, sometimes we can overthink things or think ourselves out of money, get a little bit too creative. So to me, we play at the slate 100 times. Like, Goff's passing range is pretty obvious most of those times.
We can do a couple quick hitters before we move on. Wally in the chat asking about Sam Darnold. I'll toss Russell Wilson in there as well, just because he's cheap and playing a Steelers defense that has given up some really big games, notably to Winston a couple weeks ago. Any thoughts on those pocket passers? Yeah,
I mean, I think Russ is a super sharp play this week. The like I said at the top, the question is just how effective are they at moving the ball if they can't run it? And I think that's an open question. That's something to be concerned about. But no, I think Russ is extremely sharp this week. Who was the other one that you just said?
Darnold.
Darnold.
I was wondering about.
Yeah. I was looking at ownership this morning and seeing how low owned Justin Jefferson's going to be. Mm-hmm. Tennessee's got a really good defense. Tennessee has Will Levis under center against this Vikings defense. So we always want to think about games through the lens of, like, game environment, right? That's why, like, Goff, the matchup's great. Do we really like him, right? Darnold, yeah, like, the matchup's not great. How much are they really going to throw the ball here? So I'm not excited about Darnold. I could see him in large field play. It's hard to see him putting up the 27, 28, 30 pointer in this spot where I would expect the Vikings to control this game, right? I would expect the Vikings defense to do really well against Will Levis. If I played Darnold, I would absolutely play him in a stack, like a full game stack scenario, because you need the Titans to keep this game close, or even jump out to a lead in order for Darnold to have enough passing volume to be a tournament winner. So I would play Darnold, like, with Justin Jefferson and Calvin Ridley, something like that, to where you're telling the story of how Darnold ends up getting there, as opposed to just throwing a dart at Darnold and hoping he ends up with a big game.
I got one more I want to ask you about, and then I always want you to hit on any that you think are interesting that I didn't ask about. Thoughts on Geno in this matchup? Potential negative game script. We saw the JSN breakout week a couple weeks ago. Now they get DK Metcalf back. How do you feel about him in this spot?
Yeah, Jameis, 17, let's throw out the 9-pointer against Buffalo. Obviously 28 points against the Rams, and then 17, 22, 22, 13, 20, 18, like, those are pretty consistently. He's only 5,700. Consistently, he's scoring 17 to 22 DraftKings points with the occasional score above that. So that puts him just, like, slightly below Brock Purdy range in terms of consistency of outcome. And so, yeah, I don't mind Geno in this spot. Geno, I think you want to get creative in how you play him, like, really tell a story of this game taking off, because it's a good 49ers defense. There's been a lot of talk about the 49ers defense not being as good as in the past, and yet they're still, like, one of the top 8 to 10 defenses in the NFL. So we can kind of slip into the trap of thinking, oh, this is a softer matchup. It's, like, softer than it used to be. Still not a great matchup. So yeah, I think Geno's interesting. Probably not something I'm going to play in single entry 3 max with under 1,000 entries in the tournament pool. But definitely something that, as you get into, like, larger and larger tournament sizes, I think he becomes more and more interesting.
Any other quarterbacks that we haven't mentioned that you want to make sure to spotlight, or are we good to move on to running backs?
We're good to move on. Yeah, I think we covered quarterback pretty well there.
Perfect. Let's head over to running back. I think we can start right at the top in that same game with the Seahawks and Niners. CMC, we were out without him for 9 weeks. And now he's back to being, one of the best plays on the slate. He's our cover boy this week. Anything bad to say about Christian McCaffrey at 8,300?
Yeah, I don't get initial ownership projections where he's kind of like a couple steps down from Alvin Kamara. Christian McCaffrey last year, he scored 28 plus DraftKings points in 37% of his games. He scored 19.8 plus DraftKings points in like 87% of his games. For Alvin Kamara, those numbers this year are 20% and 40%. And Kamara's in a tougher matchup. Christian McCaffrey had his normal role last week. So yeah, to me, Christian McCaffrey, just an excellent play this week. I mean, not much else needs to be said. We are right back in 2023 Christian McCaffrey zone where it's like, oh, he's 8,300. He's in a decent enough matchup. Like he should be one of the first guys you're considering on the slate.
Right. I mean, what do you think? His true price should be like 89 or 9K here?
Well, I mean, his true price based on like traditional long-time DraftKings pricing should be like 85, 8,600. But based on how DraftKings is pricing players now, 89 to 9,200 because DraftKings gotten so aggressive with pricing this year to where most players are fundamentally overpriced compared to how DraftKings has handled pricing over the last decade. And so through that lens, Christian McCaffrey, you bump him up even a little bit more. You could say he's like 800, 900 underpriced right here.
You mentioned Kamara, we have a lot of, these high end guys who have been, receiving pretty big workloads. Obviously Kamara, Achane on this slate in a good matchup, Breece Hall, people feel a little burned by him. Kyren Williams, always hard to poke holes in his workload. And then Bijan, who's been absolutely on fire. So outside of Christian McCaffrey, who it sounds like is kind of in a tier of his own, how are you thinking about this next group of running backs?
Yeah, to me, it's Achane as like a clear step above any of these other guys. And what's interesting about Achane, he's got this broad range of outcomes, right? When he misses, he can put up a 10.5 pointer, a 10.2 pointer. But when he hits, it's up into this, basically in this Christian McCaffrey range. He had a 54 pointer last year. We haven't seen another game like that, but like Christian McCaffrey, it's mostly going to be in the 49ers. This isn't Christian McCaffrey with the Panthers, right? So Christian McCaffrey with the 49ers, it's mostly going to be 28 pointers to 30, 31 pointers. And then, once a season or so, he's going to have like a 40 something burger. And that's kind of what Achane is right now, except that when he misses much lower, but it's like 9 out of 14. If you take games where he had a role and Tua was starting, it's like 9 out of 14 that he's had 23 plus DraftKings points and 8 out of 14 that he's had 25 plus DraftKings points. Like if those numbers went over your head, if you're listening to this, like take a moment to think about that. Take a moment to think about the fact that most players are going to hit around 4x their salary 25% of the time. And with the way DraftKings has gotten aggressive with pricing, with the way defenses are fighting back this year, we're not even seeing 20% of the time. We're seeing 15% hit rates, maybe some 20% hit rates. Achane has like a 50+% hit rate when he has a role and Tua is under center. And so, Achane is just, to me, such a sharp play. And I think the sticking point for some people is like, yeah, but when he misses, I'm getting 10 points. But my pushback is like, if you get 16 points from Achane at this price tag, you're not winning a tournament. If you get
right,
why do people like Kamara? Because of the pass catching role. And it's like, well, even if he misses, he's going to get me like 17 points. If you get 17 points from Kamara, you're not winning a tournament. And so the fact that, if we're just looking at high end outcomes, the fact that Achane hits it so much more often than other players just makes him really stand out on this slate.
I agree completely. And I think really the only concern is that he just becomes overwhelmingly popular because you're saving 1K off of Kamara. And then I think we got the report today, Tyreek Hill saying he's going to play through this wrist injury. It did not sound good as far as him. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to gut it out. Like, I don't want to, have surgery and then be on the shelf. So I just wonder if like that narrative and then people being like, the Dolphins are big home faves here with a 26-point team total. Let's all pile in on Achane. I mean, that's really my only concern at this point, because I agree. He just looks like a smash here.
Yeah. And there are unique ways to play Achane. I mean, you play Achane alongside Tyreek Hill. People are not going to be doing that. You play Achane, which for context there, in 4 of the 9 games that Achane has hit, Tyreek Hill has also hit alongside him. So, I mean, that's kind of plus EV. If the wrist thing is weird, right? Like Amari Cooper's missed a couple of games at the wrist. Tyreek Hill is having this wrist issue. Like these are incredibly tough human beings. But then it's like a wrist, really, like that's going to keep you out of these games. It's such an interesting, or like Tyreek Hill can still get open. You know what I mean? Like it's weird that the wrist, I wonder if his recent box scores are leading to people, because his ownership projections right now are coming in low, right? Like if his recent box scores are making people be like, oh, he's injured, that's why he's not hitting. And it's like, is that why he's not hitting? Because all he has to do is get wide open and hit these big plays. So, I mean, I think throwing Tyreek Hill onto an Achane roster, throwing Christian McCaffrey onto an Achane roster, I think there are ways to get unique with your Achane plays. And there's some high upside plays on this slate that are coming in at low ownerships, whether it's George Pickens or whether it's Mike Williams on that same offense, or there's some other pieces that are like high upside, low ownership. You throw one of them onto an Achane roster and you're still separating from what other people are doing. So I'm not too worried about the Achane ownership. And again, can he hit for 10 points? Yeah, but also his likeliest outcome, he's proven, likeliest outcome is like 25 plus DraftKings points, and he's 7,200. And we're not getting many 25 plus pointers right now in the NFL. So yeah, I like Achane a lot this week.
Let me ask you about those Bears running backs, Lions running backs. You said you had no interest in Goff, but with this team total, I got to imagine you have a little interest in one, if not both Bears running backs. Or Scott,
yeah, I think Gibbs is Gibbs is the one who's probably going to return like tournament winning value. So Gibbs, when he's hitting, almost inevitably when he's hitting, the Lions are posting like 30 plus real life points. So this is since the start of last year when Gibbs has hit with Montgomery playing, the Lions have scored 41, 42, 30, and 31. So we're looking at Gibbs as a guy who we really want the Lions to be in a game where they're scoring a bunch of points, because they're not going to score 3 touchdowns and like all 3 of them come through Gibbs, right? Like Monty's going to get some of them, somebody else is going to get some of them. But when they're scoring a ton of points, there's this opportunity for Gibbs to get his 1 or 2 touchdowns. So yeah, in a game where the Lions are implied to score over 30 points based on, Vegas team totals and spread. Yeah, it's a nice spot for Gibbs. So he's obviously a tier below Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane, but he's that next player for me below those guys.
Okay. Let's see here. As far as some other running backs here, we have a couple Q tags, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, I think both are expected to play. Any thoughts on those guys as far as kind of just like hunting, for big workloads on teams that might go a little under the radar?
I mean, the price tags on those guys aren't too different from some of these other guys. So for me, those guys are sort of in like a different tier. Josh Jacobs, maybe for large field. Aaron Jones, not really on my radar. Josh Jacobs has got this big workload, but when the Packers get close to the end zone, Jordan loves throwing the ball, right? So we're just not seeing a lot of big scores from Josh Jacobs. He's got the one game over like 21 DraftKings points on the year. So for me, yeah, it kind of goes like these top few guys. And there's other guys up here at the top that we didn't like dive into that I don't mind. Like, I'm not going to argue against Kamara because of the pass catching work. I'm not going to argue against Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams kind of interesting. Typically, like a 2 touchdown game is what gets you to that 4X or above. If you put 2 touchdowns on every single game of his this year, he still would not have hit a 4X salary multiplier, which is kind of interesting. So, Kyren Williams, I think a little bit overpriced right now, but again, in a good spot. Bijan Robinson, not a great matchup, but he can hit. Breece Hall, the role is not what people think it is, but he can hit. Like there's a lot of guys up here who can hit. They're just like a couple steps, 3 steps below Christian McCaffrey for me, 2 steps below Achane, and a step below Jahmyr Gibbs for me in that range. And then for me, I kind of moved from there down to the more affordable guys, which in the context of current DraftKings pricing is like the low 6Ks. And it's really Rhamondre, Stevenson, and Nick Chubb who stand out to me down here. Not say that there aren't other guys we can make a case for, but those are the 2 who most draw my attention in this spot.
Yeah, those 2 drew my attention as well. Nick Chubb's interesting, right? I mean, his workload kind of dipped last week relative to his, or it was a few weeks ago, but now coming off back-to-back weeks, 15 and 16 attempts. And, the Chargers and Ravens are 2 of the stiffer run defenses, right? And now if we're getting 16 plus touches against the Saints, that starts to get really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, it's such a good matchup. And I don't think we get north of 18 touches for Nick Chubb, right? I mean, he is kind of this is such an interesting shift where you lose Deshaun Watson, who the fans absolutely abhorred, and you add Nick Chubb, who the fans adore, and he's kind of the heartbeat of this team. Fans are excited that he's back. Players are excited that he's back. We saw it in that first game where they were trying to get him a touchdown, right? He only had 11 carries, but they were trying to get him the ball close to the goal line. And yeah, I mean, it's the type of thing where there's no reason in a lost season for them to push him, for them to give him 26, 28 touches. Jerome Ford is back. We're not going to see a huge workload for Nick Chubb, and he doesn't catch a lot of passes. So you're talking a yardage and touchdown back who's probably going to get 16 to 18 carries. But against the Saints, couldn't Nick Chubb put up 130 yards and a score on 16 to 18 carries. So I think that he's kind of like tier 2 for me among like these guys, like Rhamondre Stevenson above him, and then Nick Chubb next. But Nick Chubb is very interesting, especially in larger field play, because what if that's 2 touchdowns instead of 1 touchdown? And then Rhamondre, I mean, we've explored this. He kind of broke the trend last week in a close game where he scored 8.7 DraftKings points. But other close games for the Patriots this year, 24, 17, 19, 23, 22. So basically 17 to 24 in every other close game. I think the Patriots can keep this game close. They're one of these teams that, I mean, like, look at the Cardinals, right? We've gotten to the point in the season where with the Cardinals, we have to be like, okay, I don't get it. I don't like look at the talent on defense and say, this team is good, but they're 6-4 and they're kind of in the driver's seat for that tough NFC West. Not to say the Patriots are in that category, but they're a team where the sum is greater than the individual parts, and they are playing better and better. And so, yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see the Patriots keeping this game close and competitive throughout. If that's the case, Rhamondre Stevenson becomes really interesting again.
Yeah, I like that call out. And, especially too with just the, Antonio Gibson is kind of completely fallen out of favor with the offense. They're actually using Jamichael Hasty now as the RB2.
Yeah.
All right, let's I feel like we have a good handle on running back here. Thanks to everyone hanging out in the chat here live on a Friday afternoon. If you guys are listening on playback, Jam and I stream these live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern on my YouTube channel. If you guys are watching and aren't subscribed, please do subscribe to the channel. Helps us out here. I end up doing, I think, 4 shows a week on the channel. We immediately following this will have Often on the Clock, very similar structured show is to this one, except exclusively focusing on the underdog draft games for the week. I do that with the Badge Bros, Nez and John, so you can stick around for that. On Mondays, I do a portfolio review show where I recap all of the action over the week. And then on Thursdays, I do lulls with Brian Hooper, a top DFS player. Yesterday, we had Petty Theft on, a very sharp DFS player who's retiring from NBA DFS. And you can kind of hear him say why he is done with NBA and actually shares some good strategy nuggets on the way out. And then I also have the 2 premium shows a week as well for YouTube members. There's the join button down there, can support the channel and get 2 extra shows a week, DFS After Dark on Saturday nights, and then the Cram shows on Sunday. So if you have questions about that, you can ask me. Otherwise, your YouTube membership will unlock those. All right, Jam, let's head over to wide receiver now. What are we going to do with Justin Jefferson? It's he's been priced up here a while. I'm looking at this box score last week. People feeling a little burned with that 10-point game against Jacksonville. Can we go back to Justin Jefferson here?
Man, I tried so hard with Jefferson last week, where it was like finding ways to get Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Justin Jefferson on rosters together, and it was the pieces that opened up that combination that actually hit, and it was like Saquon and Justin Jefferson that didn't hit. It was just kind of a crazy situation. JJ, the thing is, like, so what I said last week where they were playing the Jags, I was like, I really don't want to play JJ unless value that I feel comfortable with opens up, right? So on that roster, it was a Purdy roster, but I had A.D. Mitchell and Mac Hollins and somebody else who I really like, Hunter Henry, who didn't end up hitting, but like I really liked that value. And so, but the situation is like he's overpriced for his production. It's nothing about him. He still looks like the best wide receiver in football. It's just that Kevin O'Connell doesn't have the trust in Sam Darnold that he has in Kirk Cousins. So we're not seeing Kirk Cousins would throw 36 to 40 times a game, and Sam Darnold's rarely throwing for more than 30, 31 pass attempts. And so when that's the case, it's just harder for Justin Jefferson to pile up the type of production he was piling up last year. Last year, he was scoring 30-plus points over 50% of the time.
Yeah.
This year, he hasn't scored 30-plus points. We're in week 11, right? His best game of the season is 26.3 back in week 2 in a competitive game against San Francisco. So, yeah, to me, this is a spot where you look at him and see the lower ownership, and then you're like, man, maybe in large field play, I take some swings. But the likeliest outcome is it's not like this is fluky. It's a function of who's at quarterback now, how they're calling these games, how these games are developing. And it's probable that Minnesota controls this game against Will Levis and the Titans. And so, yeah, to me, it's kind of just a dart, like hope you get lucky type of thing, because the talent is obviously there. He's open. he's functioning well when Darnold throws it to him. It's just like the volume's not there the way that it was in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting week as far as the top wide receivers and ownership. I'm looking at like the top 10 projected wide receivers, and other than like Debo, who's inching over 10%, like all of these guys are in single digit ownership. So if you want Amon-Ra, if you want Puka, if you want Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, like these guys are all going to come in sub 10%. Do you have any thoughts on some of these guys on the high end? I assume you have no interest in Amon-Ra if you have no interest in Goff.
Yeah, and again, that's just a function of volume, similar to Justin Jefferson, but even more extreme because the Lions are controlling games; they're not throwing the ball a ton. So, with like all three guys healthy on the Rams, it's been more often Puka who hits than Kupp. So, could Kupp hit? Yes. Is Puka likelier? Yes. With both guys, I think you want to play a Patriots piece with them because you want to bet on like a game environment where the Patriots are keeping things close. If the Patriots aren't keeping things close, you're not saying these guys don't typically hit for like 60-yard plays. They're not Tyreek Hill, right? You're not hoping that they hit on limited volume. They need the volume in order to hit. And so you're hoping this game stays close, competitive. So I would play these guys with the Patriots piece. Not interested in Devontae Adams because, again, we explored this last week, but in the way that he's used in the Aaron Rodgers offense, he needs like 14 plus targets to have a clear pathway to hitting. And unless the Jets are in a game where they're being pushed, and ideally Garrett Wilson's not there where it's just Devontae Adams, you're probably not going to see 14 targets for Devontae Adams. Garrett Wilson probably needs 2 touchdowns in order to go for 4X, but he can do it. Not necessarily something I want to chase, but he can do it. And then up here, 3 guys, Tyreek Hill, George Pickens, Zay Flowers. I mean, Tyreek Hill, again, I don't know, right? Like the matchup's not great. It's honestly not because teams bias their attack toward the ground against people. Look at the Raiders and like, they're bad, right? Yeah, maybe they're not good, but teams bias their attack toward the ground. Teams typically don't throw on the perimeter against the Raiders, just structurally the way that the Raiders play defense. So it's not a great spot, but also I try to put myself in the context of last year. At 8,500, would we have played Tyreek Hill here? Like last year, before he got hurt, he scored 25 plus or 27 plus DraftKings points in 9 out of 12 games. And the ones where he didn't was like early season Patriots, where Christian Gonzalez was shutting guys down, and then Bills and Chiefs, who were like 2 of the best defenses against wide receivers. So I feel like last year, if we were looking at the box scores and they were just consistent hits, we would be like, are we really worried about him against the Raiders? So Tyreek Hill is kind of this weird one for me where it's like, I don't know how confident I feel in him. I don't know how much a wrist injury is affecting his ability to hit for big games because it's not like we're relying on him, shoving off in the short areas and getting open. It's like we're just trying to get him wide open 30 yards downfield and then nobody catches him. So, Tyreek Hill's interesting. George Pickens, where we should see 8 to 10 targets. I mean, George Pickens, his usage metrics are through the roof since Russell Wilson took over. He's like top 5, top 7 in like every usage metrics, like air yards and target share and end zone targets. And so George Pickens, really interesting against this Baltimore team that obviously, we can pick on with wide receivers. And then Zay Flowers, just one where there's nothing in the matchup that points to it, but like how consistently has Zay Flowers hit this year and how consistently has the field not been on it? So when we're just looking through a slate like this where there's not a ton of places to express a ton of confidence, Zay Flowers becomes a guy who you could say, hey, this could be the guy who helps you win a tournament this week.
Yeah, I like that call a lot too. Yeah, even just looking at what he's done 3 games over, 21 fantasy points out of the last 5 here. Let's see, I would say different than maybe some of these previous weeks. There is some value that the field is going to gravitate to this week. So I'm going to toss out some of these names and kind of get your thoughts on whether this would be good chalk or bad chalk. In the 5Ks, Jacoby Myers is looking like he's going to be pretty popular. Cedric Tillman, I think is going to be paired pretty heavily with Jameis Winston. Jawan Jennings, who's been looking like a revelation in this Niners offense there in the 5s. What jumps out to you with those guys? I'll toss DeAndre Hopkins in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tillman to me Tillman should be priced at $7K. So he's head and shoulders above these other guys. In terms of like the way he's being used, similar to George Pickens, like Tillman is a top 5 to 7 wide receiver in the NFL right now since Jameis took over, just in terms of like usage metrics. And then he's been really good on that usage. So no, I think we're getting a massive discount on Cedric Tillman still. Jauan Jennings, yeah, like our likeliest outcome here is like 6 or 7 targets, right? We see the 11 target game that he's coming off of, and it makes us think this is going to keep happening. But like this 49ers offense hasn't fundamentally changed to where they're like, all right, Jauan Jennings is our focal point now. Last year, Brandon Ayuk, would have like an 11 target game, and then the next week he'd see 3 or 4 targets. So I don't want to express too much confidence in Jauan Jennings because of the one heavy target game. I do think he's very capable of hitting. I'll also note, Brock Purdy threw the ball 36 times last week. So that's only the second time in their last 17 regular season wins that he's top 30 pass attempts. So we probably don't get, 36 passes again in the spot. We probably get his typical 28 to 30. So I don't mind Jauan Jennings, but I think he's priced about where he should be priced. I don't mind DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's priced about where he should be priced, and he's in a tough matchup here. There was one other guy you mentioned.
Jacoby.
Oh yeah, Jacoby Myers. Yeah, I mean, I think Jacoby Myers is like a really safe play. It's fair to question the ceiling, and it's not because he individually as a player doesn't have ceiling. It's just because like, what's the ceiling of this offense scoring touchdowns? And so he's going to need the touchdown to post a score that you couldn't live without. He's probably going to need 2 touchdowns to post a score you couldn't live without. So Jacoby kind of falls into the bucket of players I won't argue against, but probably won't be heavy on myself.
Yep. Makes sense. Let's go a little bit lower. It's always hard to come by sub 4K value, like you said, with how DraftKings has been so aggressive with pricing. I'll toss a few names at you. Kayshon Boutte, who's had a pretty nice role for the Patriots. I know you liked Maye, so maybe some interest there. And then a guy you've mentioned previously on this show who has a pretty good matchup, Devon Vele, here at 3,900. Any thoughts on those pass catchers with the rookie quarterbacks?
How about Vele catching steam, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I already bet. I'll tell you right now. I already bet an anytime touchdown this weekend for Devon Vele. So we're on the trade, buddy.
I hope you got good odds on that.
I did.
Kayshon Boutte is like, it's 3 straight games with 6 targets, right? Like teams are dynamic. Teams develop as the season moves along, and so there was the game where Drake Maye got hurt and Brissett came in and he saw 6 targets, and then back-to-back games with 6 targets. His average depth of target in these 3 games is like 18.4 or something, which is just outrageous, right? Just bombing the ball downfield to him. He's really fits the archetype of what we look for in a cheap with upside pass catcher. Somebody who, they might only see 4 to 6 targets, but they're downfield targets. They can hit for big plays. So when I was going through research, it was like, oh, he's a really sharp play. And then you flip over the cards and look at ownership projection, and you're like, oh man, really? Like he's going to be pushing close to 20% owned. Like they're every week, they're like, not every week, most weeks as we get deeper into the season, there's going to be like a sub 4,500 wide receiver who goes for 17 to 20 points, right? Like Pearsall did it last week. I feel like somebody else did it last week. Mac Hollins and A.D. Mitchell obviously were like more projectable, but in terms of like guys you can't really project, but you're like, well, they're on the field, they have a role, they can hit for big plays, and that's typically a big part of winning tournaments as you get to the back half of the season, where you lose last year it was Adam Thielen or Deontay Johnson's second year where he first emerged. Like you start to lose these guys who Puka Nacua last year, Tank Dell last year, who they're just underpriced, and you can get them for 4,500 and below, and they just have big roles. Cedric Tillman a few weeks ago. You start to lose those guys, and you have to shift over to who's on the field a lot and can hit for big plays, and then you roster those guys, right? And you kind of mix and match who you roster in that bucket. So Boutte is in that bucket, but he's not like a reliable play. So the fact that he's going to be as high owned as he is actually does take some of the shine off of him. Similar to what we said about Drake Maye earlier, like he doesn't know that he's going to be high owned. So it doesn't impact his production in this spot. But if we played out the slate 100 times, he's going to be dramatically more plus EV. You would make dramatically more money if he were low owned, because he's probably not hitting 20% of the time. He's probably hitting like 8% of the time. So you'd love for him to be 3% owned, right? So I think he's an interesting play. I think that probably not really any different from Calvin Austin, right? Calvin Austin, we look at his recent targets, 6, 4, 4, 5. I mean, same type of thing, right? A guy who can score from anywhere on the field, a guy who scored 19 plus points twice this season. One of those was with a punt return touchdown or kickoff return touchdown, but still, a guy who's capable of hitting for big plays, capable of hitting, big games. I mean, I guess that's kind of, it's really doesn't there's not much beyond that you can really look at and be like, here's the guys who are on the field and can hit. And then I want to throw Mike Williams in there. He's 4,100.
Okay.
Last week he played 9 snaps, whatever it was. Don't we think he's probably going to play more this week, right? And he's in this role where he doesn't need to know the playbook all that well. I actually had a Russ Mike Williams stack last week on one of my tighter builds, hoping that he would play like 25 snaps, but where it's like he doesn't need to know the whole playbook. They just need to be able to throw the ball to him downfield. And so he kind of falls into that bucket. Elijah Moore isn't that much more expensive than these other guys. He falls into that bucket. So yeah, I mean, I like these plays. I think it's fair to highlight that, you know, there's going to be a little bit more confidence expressed in Kayshon Boutte than we necessarily want.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. You mentioned Mike Williams, and my guy Mathology in the chat was wondering if you would grab your wrench and take a look under the Calvin Austin hood here. Does he kind of fall in that similar bucket as far as Steelers pass catchers who could be intriguing?
Yeah, I mean, 4 to 6 targets, you know, kind of week in and week out, and he can score from anywhere. So these are the guys we want to look at down in the cheaper range. You know, Troy Franklin kind of in that bucket, although we can never bank on what usage is going to look like for a Broncos wide receiver that's not Cortland Sutton, right? We've got like 2, 4, 2, 6 targets the last 4 games. Bo Nix college teammate, so obviously there's rapport there. But a guy with a downfield role who can score from anywhere on the field. We also didn't mention, speaking of Sutton, we didn't mention Sutton. We didn't mention Calvin Ridley, another 2 guys who are going to be popular, but I think rightfully so. Both of them kind of usage metrics through the roof, similar to Cedric Tillman and George Pickens. Like those 4 wide receivers really stand out just in terms of like how they're being used and how they're likely to be used this week. And then you kind of from there, you move on to who else can you throw in there that might outscore them, or who could you look at through a different lens? You know, we mentioned Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas. Nobody's going to play him. He's 47.
Yeah.
Right. We mentioned Elijah Moore. This is pretty crazy. Okay. Targets, target percentage, air yards, end zone targets, first read targets. Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy have almost the identical statistics in all of those categories since Jameis Winston took over.
Yeah.
But Elijah Moore's going to be popular because he's 4,300. Jerry Judy's 5,400. So one of those spots where you could pay up to be contrarian. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do at the wide receiver position. Kind of a few guys that I'm expressing confidence in. And then from there, it's like, okay, what else can we do at this position?
All right, let's move on to tight end. I always got to get the pulse check, Jam, on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being you would like to fast forward to the lineup build. 10 being you wish you had an hour to discuss tight ends. Where are we falling on the week 11 scale?
Let's say 3, because there's like 3 tight ends I like, but there's one of them that I think is like a really sharp play. And I mean, he's not a sneaky play, but that play is Travis Kelce. And we've talked about this with other tight ends recently, but it's like, if you just compare him to running backs and wide receivers priced around him, he's fundamentally underpriced. And what's interesting about Kelce, we see these targets 12, 16, 12, and there was a stretch of this last year. And the question was sometimes like, why aren't defenses selling out to stop Kelce? Well, it's like, well, the dude is averaging 8.3 yards a catch across his last 6 games. Like, how much do you want to sell out to stop a guy who's averaging 8.3 yards a catch when you really can't cover Kelce with one guy? You need, like, he's so good at getting open in the short areas of the field. He rarely runs the route that's on paper, right? It's like he gets out there, it's like Gronk and Edelman with Brady, right? He gets out there, he reads the defense, and he knows how to run his route to get open. And Mahomes knows how he's going to run the route to get open. And so it's kind of unstoppable if you just got one guy on him. But if you put 2 guys on him, now you're creating an opportunity to get hit for big plays downfield. So it's kind of like, well, most teams basically face the Chiefs and just say, this happened last year, it's happening this year. It's like, we're willing to give up the 6, 7, 8, 9 yard catches to Kelce as they like between the 20s, right? And hope that we get a sack, hope that we get an incompletion, hope that we get something that stalls the drive. And basically like these extended run plays that they're running with Travis Kelce, we're willing to give those up. So it's one of these spots where I don't necessarily see the Bills selling out to say, we've got to stop Kelce in this spot. So I think we see these types of targets pile up again. And we're getting, last 3 weeks, 20, 26, 25 DraftKings points on a guy who costs 6,300. I mean, that's just really good value there. So I think Kelce's really interesting. And then beyond him, I guess more than 3 total guys, but just not a lot that really stands out, right? Brock Bowers, still seeing the volume, but like, what's his ceiling in this offense? David Njoku has actually kind of been fourth on the totem pole for targets with Jameis Winston. Makes sense because Jameis is like, I want to throw the ball downfield. He's playing the Saints team that, got rid of him and would give him a chance to start and then take it away from him. They started Taysom Hill over him for a little bit. Like, I'm sure he would love to just bombs away and hit some downfield throws. So Njoku can hit, but his likeliest outcome is that he's kind of third or fourth on that target totem pole and doesn't have a big game. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, both guys who you throw in the bucket of who could hit this week. Both of these guys could hit this week, but also, could be big misses. Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, two guys who stand out on paper, going to be higher owned than they probably should be, but they're both sharp plays. And so, outside of Kelce, it's kind of it's the typical thin tight end week. And then we've got Davis Allen. Everybody, it's like a 3 or 4 year trend of play the cheap Rams tight end. It has not paid off once. Maybe it's paid off once. Maybe Tyler Higbee had one big game when everybody was on them, but also he's 2,500. I'm always concerned when we see a 1 game role and usage spike, and then ownership swings over to that guy as a result, because it's not unusual for that to be a 1 game role and usage spike and not to continue. But he's 2,500 if you're trying to open up salary at a position where you might go out of your way to roster Hunter Henry and then get 4 points. You might go out of your way to roster Jonnu Smith and get 3 points. If Davis Allen gets you 6 or 7, that might actually be good enough this week.
Yeah, especially you mentioned it could be a 1 week trend. I mean, I feel like the Rams pass catching core is the epitome of a 1 week trend. I mean, how many weeks did we see? It's oh my God, Tyler Johnson is a fixture of the offense. And then it's now he's playing no snaps. And it's Tutu Atwell, remember him? Oh no, now he's 100% snap rate guy. It's I don't ever have a good read on what McVay's doing over here outside of the big dogs.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you can consider him. I think that he comes with risk. And I think that's what you got to understand with that play.
All right. It's time to do what we do best and build a lineup over on DraftKings. Let's get ready here. As always, we got our Deposit Kingdom weekly league pulled up. We still got the 1,200 entries. Our fill rate, a little slow. Pick it up, people. We got just under 50% of the pool available here. We got $2,000 up top, $1K to second, rake-free contest. You guys need to be in these contests. Most of the contests on DraftKings have a rake, so take advantage of these where DraftKings is not pulling any additional money out of the pool. And the one exclusive spot you can get in this contest is in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. I post it in the announcement section every Tuesday afternoon. I got the link to the Discord down below. Hop in there, go to announcements, and you can hop in this contest, which is a 3 max contest. You can put 1 in, or you can max it out at 3. JM, I asked you before the show, what's our block? You didn't tell me. I don't know if that was an element of gamesmanship or if you're actually just, flustered, but now I'm about to find out. What is the block here?
Yeah, it was definitely not gamesmanship. The block, we're going to call this block Lightning. And this block is Tyreek Hill plus George Pickens. Ooh. And so what we want to be thinking about is what makes our rosters unique. And so that's not always just a low-owned player. A lot of times it's a low-owned combination. And low-owned combinations can mean lots of different things. So last week, where I was talking earlier in the show about having some Saquon plus Christian McCaffrey plus Justin Jefferson rosters. I had a roster last week that had Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, and Garrett Wilson, right? It's nobody else was finding a way to fit those 4 players together. All 4 of those players were capable of scoring 25 to 30 points on a week where we probably wouldn't get many 25 to 30 pointers. So if you're able to get 2 of those guys together where most people don't have it, that benefits you way more than just the score. If you're able to get 3 of those guys together where most people don't have it, that benefits you way more than just the score. And so we want to be thinking about, when we're talking about these unique combinations, we're thinking about not just guys who most people won't have together, either because of pricing restrictions. So last week it was I really wanted to get 3 of these high-priced guys on as many of my rosters as I could, because most people wouldn't be able to fit more than 2 because of pricing restrictions. This week, it's not so much pricing restrictions as Tyreek Hill's coming in with relatively low projected ownership, George Pickens coming in with relatively low projected ownership. And then the next layer there is, what can these guys do when they hit, right? Both of these guys can score, even in just a pretty realistic scenario, 32, 35 points. Obviously, they both have ceiling that's higher than that, but each of these guys can score 32 to 35 points. And again, we might not see many scores of 25 plus DraftKings points. So if these 2 guys hit together, you're separating so much more than just the raw scores, because you're getting raw scores that most people won't have. Most of the Tyreek Hill rosters won't have Pickens and vice versa. So you're not just moving up with the Tyreek Hill rosters, you're moving past the Tyreek Hill rosters. You're moving past the George Pickens roster. So it doesn't have to be isolated to these two plays, but that's something to really think about on a week like this is what unique combos can you put together that can both players can score 30 plus, because that could really make a huge difference where we're not seeing many 30 plus point scores.
So that leaves us with 5K remaining for the rest of this lineup. I guess, the natural question from here is this a lineup where you would want to tack on Tua, you'd want to tack on Russell Wilson, or do you maybe have like a naked quarterback angle you'd want to explore here?
I think our options are wide open. Tua is not a guy who Tyreek Hill hitting correlates to Tua hitting. So because it's such a narrow distribution of targets. So I don't know that I necessarily need to do that, but Russell Wilson is in consideration for me this week. So on this roster, Russ is in consideration, but we could also still do a Drake Maye stack on this roster. We could also still do Josh Allen naked on this roster. We could basically go any direction that we want on this roster. I actually think the next thing I want to do is express confidence in this Travis Kelce play and throw him in at the tight end position. Because if we want to say like, where can we express some confidence and get plays that we really like? Kelce's the guy, and we still have the flex spot for if we need to save salary. Obviously, Kayshon Boutte is a sharp salary saver, but what about Hunter Henry, who has actually scored, right? Like is consistently putting up 12, 13, 17, 19 DraftKings points and is in the same price range. And then you're like, okay, people will have Kelce, people will have Hunter Henry. How many rosters will have these two guys together? If Hunter Henry's hitting, he's probably taking away points from Kayshon Boutte because those are touchdowns that Henry's getting and Kayshon Boutte's not getting. And so this kind of allows us to, again, double dip in this idea of, we're playing the top two guys are like not super popular guys, and then playing them together makes them really unique. These other two guys going to be popular guys, but playing them together makes them really unique. And so, and then this kind of also creates a little bit more salary flexibility for us where we can throw in a defense here. Let's go ahead and throw in the Jets to get one of the cheaper options that has some upside. I also like the Lions. I like the Vikings. Those defenses are more expensive, but this kind of gives us a better sense of like what we have to work with in terms of salary and then what we want to prioritize from here. Because at running back, I don't necessarily want to have Rhamondre and Nick Chubb as like my running back. No. Yeah. So I want to get up to CMC or Achane as one of these running backs. I do, like I've said, I like the Achane plus Tyreek Hill pairing, so we don't have to chop Achane off our list just because we have Tyreek Hill. But let's throw McCaffrey in first and just see what this does to salary. It doesn't really restrict us that much.
That's so I assume then if we do McCaffrey, we'll do one of Rhamondre or Chubb, right?
Yeah, let's go ahead and throw Rhamondre on here. And what this is going to open up to us is we're going to have to move some stuff around on this roster. But what this opens up to us is the opportunity we'll probably have to go from McCaffrey down to Achane. And then this will open up the opportunity for us to go with Russ and Calvin Austin or Russ and Mike Williams as kind of our finishing pieces on this stack, or to go Drake Maye and one other cheap piece on this roster. So if we throw in Russ, we've got just barely not enough for Calvin Austin. We could go from the Jets defense down to the Titans defense, 2,300. They don't force a lot of turnovers, but they're a good defense. Sam Darnold's going to make some mistakes in that game. So that's one way that we could free up the salary to go there. The other way we could do it is Drake Maye and then find, what would be the salary saver that would allow us to kind of close this out.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to do it. We don't have to close the loop perfectly on this. You see, we enter, a near dead in there, and you just kind of have to mess with the 2v2 on the quarterback in the stack, and then fiddle around with the defense. But your core block of players remains the same. And when you look at this here, Achane and Tyreek Hill, we got the Hunter Henry and Rhamondre block. We got the George Pickens and Travis Kelce. So lots of different ways that.
Hey, let's close it out because I want to see. Let's go ahead and throw Maye in.
Okay.
And then let's throw in the Jets defense and Calvin Austin. And I want to talk about that. I really don't mind having Calvin Austin and George Pickens on this together, because what we're optimally saying is the Ravens face the second highest opponent second highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL. Teams can't run the ball against them. As we already said at the top, the Steelers are still going to bias their attack toward the ground because that's how they build their offense. But we still have an opportunity, like we saw with Purdy last week. Purdy never throws more than 30 passes in a win. He threw 36 against Tampa because it was Tampa. Like, we don't expect Russ to throw it 45 times. But the Steelers want him to throw 28, 29, 30 times. Against Baltimore, it could be 36, 37 times. And so you have this opportunity for Calvin Austin to see 6-7 targets, for George Pickens to see his 10 targets, and for Drake Maye to still outscore him because we're betting on Drake Maye, Rhamondre, Hunter Henry being an offense that does well. We're betting on Drake Maye getting some rushing upside. And so this actually makes sense, even though we don't have Russ as the quarterback here. So I kind of wanted to close it out just because I do like the way that this comes together and that Calvin Austin, George Pickens discussion there.
Yeah, I think about this stuff a lot because people, the snap take is like, oh, I don't want to do Pickens and Austin without Russ. Like, how does that work? It's like, well, we have another stack in. We're playing Drake Maye, Rhamondre, Stevenson, and Hunter Henry. You can only play one quarterback. It doesn't mean you can stop correlating in your lineup. That's the whole the thought, right, behind the blocks. What can I get from this block of points from Pickens and Austin?
Yeah. I mean, you can also go down to the Titans defense and go up to Russ. Like, you have flexibility there as well, to where now you're betting on Russ being the guy passing. You're betting on Hunter Henry and Rhamondre, being the reason why Drake Maye is not the quarterback that you want there. So there's flexibility there. But exactly, we've got Tyreek and Achane, where, again, 4 out of these 14 games that Achane has had a role and 2 has been under center, Tyreek and Achane have hit together. It's 1 game of 52 and then 3 games of 60 plus. One of them is like 80 points combined. So, again, saying like Dolphins offense does well, they're concentrated. These are the guys who score. With Pickens and Austin, it's saying Steelers have to throw the ball, and these are the guys who are going to see the volume or going to see the target. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff we could do to kind of close out this roster. But the starting point, kind of gives us a sense of how we would want to think through this and how we can be unique while still building for ceiling on this slate.
Yeah, and it's just, this lineup I like a lot too, because at the end of the day, this lineup is essentially trying to get 4 things right? The Patriots have a good game at home. The Dolphins have a good game at home. The Steelers passing game clicks, and Travis Kelce continues to do what he's been doing. That's all you're asking from a lineup of 9 spots. If those 4 theses hold true, you're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah. I mean, probabilistically, the fewer things you can give yourself to get right, it's like a Cubs fan used to say, is like, if you're trying to guess a 9 combination lock versus trying to guess a 4 or 5 combination lock, the odds change dramatically with each additional combination that you add on there. And so that's why you see so many winning rosters that, they don't optimize points. They don't get the absolute most number of points you could get, but a lot of times you don't need the most number of points you can get. What you need is, just to get enough things right. And so you see these rosters that bet on 4 or 5 things winning contests, even though they're kind of blocking up some of their path to additional points, doesn't actually end up mattering because the people who are trying to guess that 9 combination, lock correct, most weeks they're not going to get it. And so those 4 or 5 combination locks are the ones that end up winning.
All right, guys, that is going to be it for the Block Party DFS show. Make sure you guys are checking out all of the content on OWS this weekend. I know Jam's going to start populating his player grid later tonight, and then a bunch of content rolling in Saturday, and then the updated thoughts on Sunday morning. You guys can always get a full subscription. You can get 50% off that with promo code Pete50, all of your inner circle in DFS subs over there. Anything else people should keep an eye out for, Jam?
I froze on my end, so I didn't even hear what you said. But keep an eye out for content. Keep an eye out for OWS pennants at the tops of the leaderboards. Hopefully, we'll see up there. We will see you up there as well this week.
Perfect, guys. And in about 20 minutes, I'll be kicking off with the Badge Bros on Off and On the Clock. You can watch that on their channel or on this one. The redirect should take you right there. Otherwise, good luck this weekend, and we'll be recapping all of my DraftKings lineups on the Monday portfolio review. We'll see you guys then. Peace out.